quote first. The quote is that the first and best victory is to conquer self. So when someone comes to a gym, it's almost assumed right out the outset that that person has a certain number of capacities, if only because of the fact that they're a human being. So for example, if you go into a CrossFit gym, you have 100 people, the WOD of the day might be snatches for time, followed by wall balls, followed by, whatever else they put in there. And when you say you have a room full of 100 random people, and you were to ask me, how many of those people do you feel have the prerequisites to achieve a snatch safely? The answer, in my view, would only be maybe one, maybe no people out of 100 people, because the physical capacities necessary to snatch, not for time, just to do the Olympic weightlifting snatch, is immense. You need an incredible amount of ankle dorsiflexion. I advise you to go watch Olympic lifters doing the snatch, and what you'll notice is that the amount of dorsiflexion necessary to catch a snatch properly far exceeds what's necessary for a high bar back squat or a low bar back squat or a box squat, if we go retrospectively the other way with regards to how much ankle dorsiflexion you need. When you're at the end of a snatch, your knee is translating across your toe almost a full foot length across. The number of people that have the capacity to dorsiflex that much is rare, okay? So when we get a client, if the person wants to perform the Olympic weightlifting snatch, we don't just let them do it. We break down their prerequisites. We look at every joint and we ask ourselves, do they have the prerequisite motion to accomplish the task they want to do safely? Because if you don't have prerequisite motion, what the body does is the body accommodates for the movement, and it starts to put the onus of movement away from the joint that's restricted, and it starts to translate it into the joints above and below. So for example, if you go into the basement of a snatch and you don't have enough ankle dorsiflexion, the movement that is not being given at the ankle will be asked for from the knee or from the hip or from the spine. And what happens now is, to compensate for that shitty ankle, you're going to ask the hip, knee, and spine to do things to compensate for an ankle. But you guys would agree that an ankle is not a knee, and an ankle is not a hip, and an ankle is not a spine, nor are those structures ankles. So you can't say that a knee works as good as an ankle does. So if the ankle job, the job of the ankle cannot be achieved, and you ask a knee to take over for the ankle, you're going to overstress that knee. And it might be difficult to see here, but if you ask someone to squat, there's always a certain amount of dorsiflexion they require. If I go into a low bar back squat, I don't require a lot of dorsiflexion. But if I go into a front squat, again, the amount of dorsiflexion is now immense. If I don't have that dorsiflexion in that squat, what I do to compensate is this. So in other words, because I can't come forward in the squat, I tend to increase the acuteness of my hip angle into flexion. And the problem with that is, if you increase the acuteness of the hip angle into flexion, people start to complain of deep-seated pinching in their hips. And this is a very common finding that I find with CrossFitters who are getting into Olympic lifting, for example. They'll tell me that at the basement of a squat, they'll feel pinching on their anterior hip tissue, which can lead to bursitis, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the vast majority of people in this case would look at your squat and they would say, your knee's going this way, this isn't going this, you're not going low enough, you're not tilting forward, you're not keeping your chest up, you don't have neutral spine, blah, 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 blah. A whole list of external cues that they want you to do with your body. But the problem that people forget is that the body is what's doing the lift. So if the body's joints don't have the prerequisite motions to do the lift, then the body accommodates to the lift. The lift will not accommodate to the body. So if you have a situation where you have a restricted hip on one side, let's say one of your hips is very stiff compared to the other hip. When you go to do these exercises, if the one hip doesn't have the prerequisite, the rest of the body compensates. And if you have access to, let's say, 60% of one hip, but only 20% of another hip, and you say, go ahead and squat, go ahead and snatch, you're actually building the imbalances that thousands and thousands of manual therapists are running after every day to try to fix. You know, when you tell someone who doesn't have access to their hip to squat in a certain way, and you say you have to squat to this depth and you assume they can do it, you're forcing them to do it. And one of the main interests in our system, functional range conditioning, is the understanding that the body has to be prepared for the exercise, and the understanding that it's the body that is the goal to train. The exercise is just a tool with which you're trying to use to adapt the body. So the focus automatically changes to the person's body. And now we go back to this quote: the first and best victory is to conquer self. If people don't have control of their internal environments, it's very difficult to give them external tasks and to assume that they can do those properly. And that's what's pretty much done. So I'll always give this